Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Straffolino. Joining me usually is my good compatriot, Tom Hollingsworth, but we liked him so much on last week's show that we decided to bring back the big boss himself. Stephen Foskett is joining me from across a very great distance, Stephen, so I appreciate you making the time to be here on the Gestalt IT Rundown.
Why, thank you, Rich. It's great to be here. And I actually, just for those of you at home, so if you look in the background, so Rich is actually right through the wall that way, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, if you have like a Lytro visibility camera where you can see in 3D, you can actually turn it and see me. Yeah, so
No,
use your
that's not
your
right.
X-ray IP camera vision, and you can see me. So it's nice to see everybody. All right, Stephen, we have a ton of news this week, so let's just jump right into it. One of the bigger pieces of news, I think, on a enterprise level was some published exploits to Apple's mobile device management. Duo Security published a report detailing an exploit to Apple's MDM. They used spoofed serial numbers of enrolled devices, and they were able to connect malicious devices to trusted MDM portals, gaining access to secure networks and file shares. The issue is that Apple's MDM system allows for user authentication prior to device enrollment, but does not strictly require it. So if you leave that off, you just need the serial number, one factor, to get in. And that's something that can easily be spoofed either by brute force. It's a fairly predictable pattern for what serial numbers are assigned. It's not exactly secret. Most people wouldn't blur that out in a screenshot or something like that, or just through simple social engineering. So the question here is, Stephen, you can get into all sorts of VPNs once you get behind that MDM portal. Are we just putting too much trust inherently in kind of these MDM systems, or is this just Apple needing to turn a switch on to make sure that there's another factor involved?
Yeah, I'd say that it's the latter. I mean, Apple has been really assiduous in trying to maintain secure connections on these systems. And, myself, maybe I'm a fanboy, but I believe that they're really trying to do their best to lock this stuff down. I am surprised that they allow enrollment with just a serial number instead of, I mean, it's not even one factor, it's zero factor. But sounds like an oversight, and I imagine that they'll fix that. I think the more interesting thing to me is that despite the fact that Apple is focused on fixing these things and focused on making the platform secure, there continue to be security breaches. Using MDM as a security breach is actually super clever. I love it. Don't love that it happened, but I love the idea. Somebody was really thinking, and I'm sure that they'll find more. I mean, it's pretty shocking to me that Apple really hasn't been able to lock that down. And I think that should tell us all something generally about security, which is basically you can never make things 100% secure. And even the best intentions don't necessarily keep things secure.
Yeah, I mean, the idea to me, the big red flag to me was that the MDM was basically, once you get past that, whether it's, with the user authentication or just with the serial number or something like that, then you have whole hog access. And that kind of goes, is kind of anathema to the security procedures we've seen on an infrastructure side, where the idea is very much, to have a very control the surface area that an exploit can hit. So that something does, if you do get past the perimeter, if you get past the firewall or something like that, it's not a total compromise, and you can kind of limit the damage. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple updates and responds to that going forward. In another security issue, Facebook, hey, they're awesome. Facebook reset access for user tokens for 90 million users after 50 million were stolen, and an additional 40 million were subject to a view as lookup in the last year. Essentially, this was an amalgamation of 3 different exploits that exploited the Facebook feature that allows you to view as another kind of user for your own profile. So you can view it as a guest, or view it as someone that has, as a friend, or as someone who's an acquaintance, stuff like that. Essentially, these exploits go back to 2017. Seems like, maybe Facebook knew about this maybe for a little bit. I think we're still determining that. But the bigger question is this, I mean, Facebook really can't afford any bad press right now, but is this overall terrible for Facebook, or only 2.5% of users were affected by this?
It's terrible. I mean, I just, there's no two ways about it. This was horrible. Mostly because, again, it was a very clever hack. Again, my hat is off to whoever decided to exploit this. But, the other thing was, because of what they did, they're theoretically able to exploit pretty much any other platform that uses Facebook for logins and access. Those of us who are industry insiders are probably pretty careful about using passwords and individualized accounts and not repeating passwords and so on. Normal people aren't. And this is just awful because essentially you could expose all sorts of accounts. I mean, heck, this streaming platform we're using right now required me to sign up for a Facebook account or sign up using my Facebook account in order to use it. And so many other things besides. And all those things are exposed as well. And just for what it's worth, point of disclosure, I'm one of the 50 million. So there's that.
Yeah, what strikes me here is that maybe this was a can of worms that Facebook is now just realizing kind of the implications of, because I think when they first came out with the Facebook sign-in that was used for everything, I think as users, we were very excited because, hey, passwords are terrible. I'm terrible at remembering passwords. All I got to do is remember one password, right? This makes it super easy. And Facebook's like, hey, data. Let's get all of this goodness. And now they're kind of realizing this is a huge surface area for an exploit. It puts an even bigger target. I mean, they already have a giant target on their back. They have 2 billion users, but this just makes that information all that more valuable, to a variety of different surfaces. Just puts a big fat target on their back. I'm wondering if Facebook's rethinking that decision.
And remember too, just to close this out, usually with these kind of leak disclosures, what happens is initially they say, oh, it's 50 million users. Facebook has already upped it to 90 million users that could potentially have been exposed. And they've basically already said, well, it basically could have been anybody. So I would not be at all surprised if we find out 6 months from now that it was literally everybody.
I'm super excited for that. They should pass a law to do something about it. And that's what California did. You like that segue there?
Nice job.
California Governor Jerry Brown signed SB 327 into law, making California the first state with an IoT law on the books. The details are starting in 2020. Any device connecting to the internet must include, quote, reasonable. That's the qualification in the actual bill itself, reasonable security to prevent unauthorized access, modification, or information disclosure. This includes a specific provision requiring unique logins and passwords for anything that connects outside of your LAN, aka no locked-in admin passwords on any devices that are theoretically going to be sold in California. So no admin, and Shodan, horror shows that you'll see online. So Stephen, I'm a little optimistic about this. I think reasonable is always kind of a fuzzy term and could be problematic down the road. But is this a good start to enforce, better IoT practices, or are these just legislators muddying the waters?
Well, I don't know. I'm all for anything that helps lock down, IoT. I do worry that we basically have a bunch of legislators kind of running off here, half something, with what seems like a good idea, but ended up not in the long run. But frankly, requiring reasonable security, that doesn't sound so bad. And one more thing too, whenever anybody says Jerry Brown, California Uber alles,
we're going to be taken down off YouTube when we post this now because
no. Oh, come on. Would Jello take us down?
I definitely think so.
Totally would.
The YouTube bots will definitely take us down.
Well, hopefully that was not long enough.
The one
folks.
The one thing I will say is, while I like the provision of the no admin passwords, this doesn't do anything for the theoretically billions of devices that are already out there. But I do think it puts in a base level of security. And again, if it's less just the dumbest brute force you can possibly have of ABC123 admin password backwards, that kind of stuff, that's worth it in and of itself. I think this relates back to something actually that was just on an episode of the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast that just came out yesterday, gestaltit.com/podcast. You and Max Mortellaro were talking about GDPR and how, and Max's point of view on that was that, I think most people are kind of behind the intent of that law. Whether the legal mechanisms are technically feasible is an open question, and how to implement it is an open question. And I think this kind of is the same thing with this IoT law. Whether people will actually be able to do it, who knows? But the intention behind it, I think everyone is getting behind.
Absolutely. And I, as somebody who uses a lot of IoT and home automation stuff, shout out to Carlo Costanzo. the security of these things is just laughable. I mean, just horrendous. And I cannot tell you, I mean, as a, I mean, I'm sure that you're like this too, and most of our viewers might be as well. You're setting up, gadgets and gizmos aplenty. And what you do is you immediately Google, like, what's the default password on fill in name here. And it's like, I literally did something this morning and the password was root and password. Literally, that's the default password on ClearOS. Now, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, once we've solved all of the IoT security woes, we'll need to connect it to the internet. And Verizon has a new, look at this segues I'm doing. I'm ruining them by talking about them. But Verizon is activating the first residential 5G broadband service going live in Houston, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, and Sacramento in parts of, I should say. The service uses 5G protocols end to end. So this kind of differentiates it from some of the stuff we've seen international, where maybe the endpoints are 5G, but on the back end, it's just using, traditional broadband. And it's promising a typical speed of 300 megabits per second with peaks of up to 1 gigabit, aka you're going to be lucky if you get 150. Service will roll out slowly in those cities, so it's in very select, just tiny areas within those cities, I'm sure, with select customers and people that aren't going to ding them too bad online. And Verizon also does warn that home equipment will need to be upgraded to the new 3GPP 5G NR standard in the future. But I think it's really, really interesting that, I don't know what any of those words mean, but evidently they're a technical specification. I just do think it's really interesting that we're now starting to see real life commercial trials of completely, completely wireless home internet service that has really high throughput, that's usable. And I'm really curious to see how businesses will react to that, right? Because we've seen already kind of the innovation around things like SD-WAN and remote offices that are using 4G connectivity and kind of using that as an emergency backend. And now being able to have reliable, high throughput, relatively 5G service, I think really opens up some interesting possibilities for remote offices and edge use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And since, in terms of broadband adoption, the last mile has been the challenge. Literally, getting the wire to your house is the problem. Honestly, I'm pretty excited about what's happening here. I would not be at all surprised to see if 5G becomes more of a broadband alternative than a, LTE successor for mobile handsets or something like that. I mean, LTE is already faster than your home broadband for many people, myself included. And although there are other alternatives to get fast broadband out to, offices and consumers, it's been challenging with that last mile. I mean, here in our town, we have a, broadband, gigabit fiber broadband offering that's only available to businesses and only available to businesses on a certain route. Now, luckily, this office is one of those offices, but, my house is located like a quarter of a mile from here, and we're not. And, basically we're, I had to fight for 50 megabits. Already, like I said, LTE is faster at my house. If they rolled out, 5G broadband, I think it could derail a lot of these, kind of fiber to the home projects and frankly, bring bandwidth to a lot more people.
And, Tom Hollingsworth will probably yell at me that I am misunderstanding the innovations of 5G. So Tom, feel free to correct me next week. But from what I understand, 5G isn't so much about increasing absolute speed to end devices. It's more about increasing the available bandwidth from, device to tower to allow for more connections there without overloading it and really making it able to sustain, more broadband and residential, theoretically more broadband and residential service. So very interesting stuff. I don't have a clever segue to this. So Stephen, you like blockchain. The Hyperledger project and the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance announced that they will collaborate on common blockchain standards. While there is no guarantee of a cross-blockchain interaction between Ethereum and others, Bitcoin, this is a good step in this direction. The Hyperledger project is an umbrella organization of over 270 open-source blockchain initiatives, and the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance has over 500 organizations that are all involved in the smart contract tokenized world of Ethereum. Now, Stephen, like I said, you're a kind of a blockchain guy. Do you think we'll see interoperability between two of the bigger blockchains within, let's say, 5 years or so? And if so, does the enterprise fully invest in blockchain? We've seen a ton of research projects kind of on this. IBM's doing some really interesting stuff. We've seen with like the UN and with tracking food shipments and international aid and stuff like that. Will the enterprise go whole hog if that happens?
No.
What up?
Womp womp. Sorry. No, honestly, I think that it's great. I think a lot of people misunderstand what Ethereum is all about. And, like you mentioned, it really is more about enabling applications and things like smart contracts than it is about, Ether tokens that are worth some money and that you mine and so on. But frankly, I think that this stuff is going to find its niche. There was irrational exuberance around it initially when everybody was like, we're going to blockchain all the things. And now people are starting to say, well, maybe we're going to blockchain some of the things. And that's great. The no really is in terms of your core question, which is, does this have something to do with Bitcoin? No.
Other than perhaps this will lead to even more enormous hype for blockchain in the enterprise. Maybe we will see. I actually heard, I was listening to the Unchained podcast, and they were discussing with a Ethereum skeptic, and it was a really interesting discussion about whether the Ethereum blockchain is truly distributed or how well distributed it is, because it's really hard, it's really lengthy to download the entire thing, and it leads into like kind of who's owning it and trust issues of you're trusting people that trust people that trust people, and some of the protocols are bloated. Very interesting stuff, but not something that we have time to delve into right here, but very cool stuff. And finally, I want to get you out on this, Stephen. We all like some good marketing, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, the Wi-Fi Alliance is here to kind of blow up some of the more traditional nomenclature we have around wireless network standards. They've announced significant rebranding of the Wi-Fi standard starting in 2019, abandoning the typical 802.11 designations. Instead, 802.11ac will be called Wi-Fi 5, and its perceived successor, 802.11ax, will be called Wi-Fi 6. 802.11ad, aka WiGig, will not receive the updated branding, but will be continued to be developed in parallel with Wi-Fi, the newly created Wi-Fi 6 for high bandwidth, short range connectivity. Stephen, there's a part of me that says, how hard is it to remember AC, B, G, N, AC? Is this so hard? It does make sense if you consider that, like, we've been doing this with Bluetooth now since Bluetooth has been a thing, and we have some, I don't think there's any lack of clarity. I guess it doesn't really matter. I think that's maybe what the Wi-Fi Alliance is trying to go for, that, okay, yeah, Wi-Fi 6 is better than Wi-Fi 5, Bluetooth 4 is better than Bluetooth 3. People really don't care, really, if with the changes in the Bluetooth spec. Are we approaching that with Wi-Fi now? Is Wi-Fi good enough that we're just like, okay, Wi-Fi 6 is better, whatever, I don't care?
There's a lot of questions there.
Let's set you up for everything.
Let's start by saying that the current naming is totally stupid. The whole 11N, 11X, 11BG, 11QR, and it's even stupider in the next generation, where we've got like all these different things that are, and I left off the 802 and the dot. I mean, the naming, the Wi-Fi naming was actually super clever. I mean, I remember when that first appeared, and it, referred to what's now, what is that, 11N, and that was great. But I think that people really are having trouble understanding it. And not only that, but like we mentioned with 5G, a lot of these new Wi-Fi standards aren't about more performance; they're about more other stuff. And I think consumers are totally confused about that. And they think, oh, well, 11AC, that's better, right? That's what I should get. And they don't understand what it is. There's been all this confusing marketing and hype about wide channels and, all this stuff that you're never going to get. I think it's fine to call it Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi whatever. It's kind of like, consumers have shown that they're interested in this stuff. You mentioned, Bluetooth. I think maybe a more relevant example would be like HDMI or, something like that. Though HDMI has, for some strange reason, been stuck at 1 point something for a while. I mean, 1.2 be better? I don't know. But, I think consumers are okay with this idea. iPhone 6 is better than iPhone 5, right? So Wi-Fi 5 is better than Wi-Fi 4.
Yeah. Well, and I think in amongst our circles there might be some skepticism or some scoffing at whether this might be considered dumbing down or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, people that care about enterprise mobility or enterprise wireless, they're still going to be head down into these specifications. 802.11 AD isn't going anywhere. Yeah, they might call it WiGig. What's that?
And neither is the name. That's the other thing. I mean, we're still going to have, those are working groups, and we're still going to have working groups, and they're still going to have specs, and that's good.
The question though I have is, when the Wi-Fi Alliance is famous for having the drafts of these working group, the working groups coming up with these drafts, and they get adopted by the manufacturer. So we're going to see, Wi-Fi's draft 7 or draft Wi-Fi 7 or something like that before it's actually certified and ratified for 3 years or however long it takes them for the next specification. That will be my question. I remember it was draft N for like 3 years.
Absolutely, we're going to see that. That is guaranteed. And people will be trying to, stumbling over each other, oh, well, this is draft 6. Well, it's not really draft 6 because that's not really AX or whatever, Yeah, just like we saw with, draft N and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. This is not going to solve all the problems in the world, but I think it's a move in the right direction.
Well, another move in the right direction was watching the Gestalt IT rundown. Stephen, thank you so much for being on and for being a steadfast co-host amongst this wide-ranging bit of IT news this week. Where can people find more of your writing, communications, and other dispatches on cyberspace?
Well, my primary outlet of pontification at this point is my Twitter, which is at @sfoskett, which is very clever. The other day, Twitter asked, like, what's the secret of your username? Like, how did you get your username? And I'm like, that's my name. Yeah, so @sfoskett. You can find me on the Twitters. You can also find me at blog.fosketts.net, at gestaltit.com, techfieldday.com, and wherever fine wines are sold.
And you can find more of my good stuff on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology, MR Anthropology, and of course on gestaltit.com. And if you're interested, we had a really interesting discussion about if data locality really matters on this week on the on-premise IT roundtable. So gestaltit.com/podcast for all of those episodes. You can subscribe there. And if you do so, I will give you a thumbs up. You won't see it, but it'll be there. So we'll be back next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time with more of your IT news. Until then, keep it locked to gestaltit.com. And till the next time we meet, have a super sparkly day.